Hey guys. Well, it's a holiday season and there's a lot of talk of poultry this time of year. So I thought I'd show you how to make the perfect chicken, at least the best chicken I know how to make, and it's pretty good. So you can see here I've got a chicken. I'm gonna go ahead and take out all the giblets, rinse it, pat it dry. So this recipe also works really well for turkey. If you're gonna do this with turkey though, don't stuff the inside cavity of the turkey. They're so much bigger they don't respond as well to being stuffed in my experience as a chicken does. So speaking of stuffing, we're going to make some. So I'm going to go ahead and take a pound of bread. You can see me kind of estimating here because this is actually a pound and a half loaf. So I'm just going to keep a pound of this bread and toast it. So I'm going to arrange it in this baking pan and put it in the oven, and we're going to toast this at 350 degrees until it's golden brown. I really love this stuffing recipe. It tastes very much like stovetop stuffing, which actually is what I really like. I don't want a really hearty, like nutty, sausagey stuffing. For some reason, they're just overwhelming. So I really like this, and it's also really simple. So next step, we're gonna take a pan, heat it up, get some butter in there, and then we're just gonna add 2 cups of onions. I've got a little shallots chopped up in here, as you can see, and 1 cup of celery. And we're going to cook it until it's translucent. So, somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes on, medium-ish heat. When they're done, they should look just like this, nice and soft and clear. And now we're going to go ahead and take our toasted bread out of the oven, perfectly golden brown, and we just want to chop this into cubes. This doesn't need to be fancy, it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just going to stack them up and just cut them up really quickly here to get them in the right shape. Alright, so the next step of this process is pretty simple. We're just going to combine everything. So go ahead and add your vegetables to the breadcrumbs, and then we're going to add the spices. So with this, you can spice this however you like. Sage is traditional. I'm not always a fan of sage, so actually what I've got right there is thyme, and then there's some allspice, and actually I'm sorry, that's allspice, and nutmeg, and I'm going to put a little fresh thyme in there also. Of course, salt and pepper. And then after that, we're going to add 2 eggs to this, and we're going to add some stock. I've got a cup of stock that's going to go in there, but I'm going to add about half of it and kind of start to mix this up and let that stock incorporate and see if I need the whole cup. In recipes, it talks a lot about how, adjust the amount of stock to what's needed. I always seem to need all of the stock in the recipe, sometimes even more. I guess I kind of like a wetter dressing. I don't want it to be too crunchy or dry. But, that's just me. So adjust this to taste. Okay, now here comes the fun part, getting the bird ready. So I'm going to separate the skin from the breast. If you've never seen this before, this is such a useful and cool technique with poultry. I'm just going to get my hand in there and kind of get medieval on this. We're just going to tear that skin away from the breast. There's a spot where it connects straight down the middle where there seems to be an extra amount of connective tissue. You can kind of see me going after it right now. That tends to be a little harder to separate. Just be prepared and know that this can take a pretty good bit of abuse before you tear the skin. So what we're going to do is once we've got that completely separated, we're going to line bacon completely covering the breast on the underside of the skin. And not just for flavoring, this is actually going to protect the chicken breast from the heat because chicken breast is done at 160 degrees Fahrenheit internal temperature, and chicken dark meat, the leg meat, is done at 180. So we actually need this breast meat to cook slower than the dark meat so that they'll be done at the same time. This is also true of turkey. So I really love this recipe for turkey because it protects all that delicious white meat so you don't get that dry white meat that's so hard to avoid with the turkey. Just for a little flair and a little taste, I'm just taking a tangerine and I'm going to cut it up and put it underneath the skin also. It just looks really pretty, especially if you have company over. It's just kind of startling to see these orange rounds underneath the skin. It adds a lot of aroma and a little bit of flavor too. The tangerine and the bacon actually go together really well. So I'm going to go ahead and finish getting those tangerine slices under the skin. Looks pretty good, right? So what we're going to do next is we're going to stuff the cavity. Now, with the turkey, I don't do this because it slows down the cooking time of the turkey, and turkeys are so big, I worry that I can't get the internal temperature of that stuffing up to where it's safe. With the chicken, it's okay to kind of overcook a chicken a little bit. It's also smaller, so it's easier to get that heat into that middle part of the cavity. So I really like stuffing chicken with the stuffing. I think it tastes better. I think you get more fat and juices into the stuffing itself. But this is optional. You don't have to do this. If you don't stuff it, and if you want to toss some half of that tangerine or some lemon in there just to kind of give it some aroma, or put some herbs in there, that's a really great trick. Now, you probably noticed the baking twine or the butcher's twine laying on the board. We're going to truss this chicken. This is pretty intimidating, I think, for most people, but it's really a worthwhile thing to do. It holds all the meat together in this kind of compact little package, as opposed to everything being open and flopped out. And that really helps the bird cook evenly. It makes a big difference in my experience, taking the time to actually truss this up. And it's not really that complicated. I'm going to try to walk you through a really simple way to do it. There's more than one. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just wrap the back legs here. And I'm just going to, it's really simple. It's not anything fancy. It's not a knot. I'm just going to wrap it around and pull it tight. You can see me doing that. And then what I'm going to do is just come straight forward, and I'm going to do a wrap around the wings. And then I'm going to use that to pull the wings together. And those are going to hold the wings next to the meat. You could really leave it there. I'm going to get a little bit fancier just because I like to, and I'm going to also wrap the wing tips and use that to kind of pull them together just so it looks a little bit more like a pretty package. And really, this only took a couple of minutes, and if you learn how to do this, it's not only does it look better when you take this out of the oven, but it genuinely cooks better. It genuinely seems to taste better and be juicier if you take the time and do this step. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and prep the pan here. I've got some nice root vegetables, some multicolored carrots, and some parsnips. I really like parsnips, especially around the wintertime. Just going to put those on the pan, salt, oil, pepper, the usual. And then I've got this great rack that I like to use for small poultry like this. Couldn't really do this with a turkey, but I'm going to put a rack over top of this and put the chicken on the rack. So all of the juices and fat that renders out of the chicken will help to cook these vegetables. Now, we're going to cook this chicken in the oven at 325 degrees, which is pretty low. There's a lot of opinions on what you should cook chicken at. I really like 325 degrees. It takes a little longer, but it's not a very big bird in the first place, and it's a lot more forgiving. It's a lot harder to screw up a chicken at this temperature than it is at 450 or 400, which some people like to cook it at. When you are done, you have to remember these root vegetables will not be done. They'll be close and they'll look pretty, but you'll need to take them, put them into a baking dish, and put them back in a hot oven. So turn the oven up to 400 or 450. I'll mention it again as we get to that point, just as a reminder. So after you got your bird oiled, salt, and seasoned and put in the oven, go ahead and put your giblets in a pan. I had a little extra space in this pan, so I put some bacon in there to fill the space. And we want this to sear. Like, we want this on medium-high heat, because what we're looking for is for browning and caramelization. And after we've gotten that, we're going to take all of that out, drain off any fat, put it back in with a bunch of stock to deglaze the pan. And this is going to be the start of our sauce or gravy. So we're just going to let that simmer for the whole time the chicken is cooking, and it's going to give us this really delicious stock to make our gravy out of. But while we're doing all of this and the chicken's baking, we're going to go ahead and prep some Brussels sprouts. They look really great on the plate. I really like them as a contrasting flavor to all the kind of heavier things on the plate. I'm just going to cut some X's in the bottom of them. Just helps them cook. So when the chicken is done, so a couple hours have passed at this point, it's going to come out of the oven. It's going to be super hot. You can see I have a temperature gauge in there, a probe. So this was 175 degrees in the thigh, which after it sits covered in tin foil for a little while is going to come up to 180, maybe a little over that. And that's going to be perfect. So now we're just going to take these root vegetables off of that pan and put them back in the oven in a baking dish at 400, 450 degrees. It doesn't really matter as long as you're paying attention to them. They'll take another 20, maybe 30 minutes to finish up. We're not going to put them back in on that pan because all of that stuff will burn at that temperature. But we are going to keep the fat to make roux, to make a thickening agent for our gravy. I love doing stuff like this. I kind of don't understand why we've sort of lost these traditions of using these renderings out of our roasted meats, because they're delicious. Also, as you can see at about this point, I'm going to go ahead and strain off our stock and just get that prepped for gravy. Now we're going to make the Brussels sprouts. These really could not be easier. We're going to put some butter in a pan on medium to medium-high heat. We're going to toss the sprouts in. We're going to cover them, and we're just going to give them a shake every once in a while. They'll kind of half steam, half braise in the pan, get this nice golden outside while still being cooked and soft in the middle. Really great, easy trick. So now we're going to make our gravy. Like I was saying, we're going to use that rendered fat as our base. So I'm going to use about 2.5 tablespoons. And I kind of break with tradition here. I use a little more fat than flour because I find that it's actually a lot easier to cook the flour if there's a little more fat in it. But traditionally, you would use equal amounts fat to flour. So I'm just going to go ahead and toss some flour in here, and we're just going to stir this until it browns. This is called a roux if you've never done this before. And you have to watch this. This is, you want to, you know how grandma made bad gravy? It's because of this process, this step right here didn't get done properly. So just stand over the kettle and stir it constantly until it turns a nice chocolatey brown color, just like this. And when you get there, about 5 to 15 minutes later, depending on how dark you like it, I made this one pretty dark, we're going to add in a little bit, just a little bit of fluid, and we're going to stir it. You can see it's going to kind of explode in there, but this is where you get lumps. If you don't stir this properly, you'll have lumps. So we're just going to do this a little bit at a time to make sure it's smooth. And when it starts to stop being super thick and starts to become more fluid-like, we can go ahead and just add the rest. And we're just going to keep stirring this until it's really well incorporated. We're going to bring it up to a simmer, and that'll help it thicken. Now we're going to get to carve the chicken here. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this twine off of it, and that'll, you know, get me ready to go ahead and carve this. Now I can't carve this in the sort of traditional way that you would carve a turkey. You have to sort of give that up because we put stuff underneath the skin. If you tried to do that, it would just fall apart. The breast would just, the skin would just pull off and things would fall out of it, and it's not very presentable. So we're going to use sort of the other method for carving a chicken or a turkey breast. But first, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the dark meat. I'm going to get everything out of the way of the breast first. So I'm going to cut off the wings, as you can see, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut the legs off below the thigh. And that'll basically just leave me with these two breasts right in front, ready to go. I'm also going to take all the orange slices out first. I'm going to leave all the bacon under the skin, and I'm going to leave the skin on it. But you can't really eat these orange slices or these tangerine slices. They're just there for decoration, and their job is done at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and pull them out, and once we're at that point, we'll be ready to start carving the breast. So to carve the breast in this situation, what we're going to do is actually cut the entire breast off. We're going to cut the whole breast off and put that on a cutting board and then come at it from a different angle. And this will give us these perfect slices of breast meat, and it'll leave a little skin with bacon on top without it all falling apart and looking horrible as you try to cut into it. So you can see me doing that now. And also, if you notice, I'm going to pull the wishbone out of this. Just a little trick. There's a little bone right at the very front if you don't know where the wishbone is. If you cut it out first, it makes cutting the whole breast off a lot simpler. So like I was saying, I'm just going to separate that whole breast and put it on the cutting board. I'm going to go ahead and take both of those off. And then you're going to see me do something kind of funky. Here's a pro trick for you. I'm going to flip the turkey, or the chicken, excuse me, over. And if you look, I'm looking for this little packet of muscle on the underside of the bird. You can actually see me pull it out, a little packet of meat. This is called the oyster, and it's delicious. It might be the most delicious part of the entire chicken. So look for those. There it is right there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and slice up the breast meat. Once this is done, you can plate it up, and it's perfect. It's absolutely my favorite poultry recipe. Really delicious, really juicy, really moist, unique and presentable. My camera, of course, died right here, right as I was about to be finished with this whole thing. So I don't actually have a video of it plated. But as you can see from cutting into the breast, that it's perfectly moist and juicy, and I do have a photo of the whole plated meal. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you give some of this a shot. It makes a really great dinner. It's also pretty simple. You can do this on a Sunday, no problem. Well, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think.